Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for coming to join me for this webinar. I appreciate all of you supporting, and I want to thank Dr. Christina Fasari for including me as one of the hosts for this event, and thank you and thank her and thank SDUIS for organizing this event. I just want to start by briefly introducing myself. My name is Ros Nideffer, and I played on the Pro Tour for almost 20 years, from 1978 to 1997. The early years I was playing junior tournaments, and then 78, 79 I started to play some of the satellite tournaments, and eventually made my way into the bigger tournaments and gained myself a ranking, and so I had a good career. I feel very fortunate to have been able to make a living playing tennis, doing something that I love, and I'm really grateful for that. My highest ranking as a singles player was 15 in the world, and as a doubles player I was number 2 doubles team in the world with 2 different players, once in 1981 and once in 83. Both of those years my partner and I won the French Open doubles. And I've had wins over Monica Seles, Pam Shriver, Zina Garrison, who else? Billie Jean King. So a number of players from a broad range, you know, from the very early years until I played against Zina, I'm forgetting her name, Venus Williams. Towards the end of my career, I didn't beat Venus, but it was very interesting to watch her really progress as a very young player, and then obviously make it to become one of the best players in the world. Anyway, that's enough about me. I'd just like to say that I'm a tennis player. I'm not a public speaker. I'm not very comfortable speaking, so I would welcome any questions that you might have. Just interrupt. Feel free to ask any questions you might have. My presentation is supposed to be on staying motivated and training during this pandemic. I'm obviously not an expert at this. None of us have been through a pandemic like this before. So I think none of us really know what to expect. You know, as athletes, for the most part, we don't know when things are going to get back to normal. We don't know when our sports are going to begin again. So it's very difficult to know how to really pace yourself. And I'm going to move off this slide. And one of the most important things is to recognize that we can't change these circumstances, and it's pretty much the same for everybody. Obviously, people's circumstances are different. Some players have access to tennis courts and some do not. So it's not exactly the same for everybody, but I think, it is the same in that the circumstances are what they are, and we don't know how it's going to turn out, and we just have to go with the flow and do the best that we can. I think it's a good time to evaluate and modify your goals at this point. I think of myself, if I were back in 1978, when I was deciding whether I wanted to be on the Pro Tour. If this pandemic had hit right then, I'm not sure I would have ended up as a professional tennis player, just because there's so many unknowns, and there were already a lot of unknowns, beginning my career. I didn't have, my parents weren't that wealthy, and I was living in South Africa, and I didn't know how I was going to afford to travel. And I was the youngest of 4 children, and my father wasn't comfortable with me traveling. Anyway, so there were lots of unknowns, and we're facing a situation now that the unknowns are just enormous. So it's a good time to decide whether you really want to proceed with, given the conditions. I know if I were having to travel with all of the restrictions, never mind now that there's the pandemic, but the restrictions that are on travel since I was on the tour have just increased exponentially. You know, the security you have to go through. I can't imagine, you know, traveling week in and week out, playing on the tour with all those kind of restrictions. And now we can anticipate that that's going to be, you know, 10 times worse. We don't even know what travel is going to be like for athletes. And another thing is we need to keep these things in perspective. I think an event like this helps us to put things in perspective. Athletes have a tendency to feel like their sport is their life. You know, that it's too easy for us to feel like our identity is tied up in our sport or our ranking or how well we perform. And a situation like this where we're forced to really put things in perspective and recognize that, you know, sport isn't everything in life. They're much more important things. And from that point of view, I think this is a great opportunity to try to get those, you know, the right perspective to play. I do know that when I was playing on the tour, you know, my identity was tied up in my ranking, and it's very difficult for that to not be the case as a professional athlete, because, you know, everybody's asking you, you know, what's your ranking? Each week the rankings change, and, you know, you might have had a good week the week before or a bad week, and somebody will say to you, well, what's your ranking now? And so depending on your ranking, it was decided whether you could get into tournaments. So if your ranking was good enough, you could get into the better tournaments. If you were ranked lower, you had to play some of the smaller tournaments. So, and a good example for me was, I think it was back in 1978, I was playing the US Open, and I think it was my first year playing the senior US Open. And I had to play the qualifying tournament, which was played a few days before the actual event started on the Monday. So I had 3 rounds of qualifying to play. I won the first 2 rounds, and then the third round of qualifying, it suddenly hit me that if I won my third and final match of qualifying, it would enable me to get a player badge, which would get me into the tournament for the rest of the week. I would I'd be allowed to use the tournament transportation, the bus and the cars from Midtown Manhattan to the stadium. I would then get prize money. I would get meals, lunch tickets. And if I lost the match, I would have none of those. So the pressure was immense. And that's just the way it is on the pro tour. You know, if your ranking's good enough, then you're considered worthy. And so it's very hard to not get caught up in that, tying your identity to your ranking. And then you experience the same thing when you retire from tennis. All of a sudden, you know, you're a nobody, and you have to, you know, reevaluate and put things in perspective and figure out, you know, that tennis is not everything in your life. So all that to say that this is a great time to put things in perspective. And I think many athletes who have had major injuries have done this, and they've had the opportunity to, where they've been injured for 3 or 4 months at a time and they haven't been able to play, and, you know, it's really helped them put things in perspective. An example that I can use was one year I was at Wimbledon. It's probably about late 80s, and at the time South Africans were being ostracized, and it was very challenging to be a South African because of the political situation in South Africa and the apartheid, and there were sanctions against players, and it was just a difficult time. And I was made it to the quarterfinals of Wimbledon, and that morning I was asked to speak at some event that was associated with the South African situation. But the event was downtown in London, central London. So it was a dilemma for me. Do I say no to this opportunity to help progress the situation in South Africa and be a voice for that? Or do I say no and say I've got a quarterfinal match to play? And I chose to go to the event. And the effect it had on me, it helped me actually relax, because it helped me put my life in perspective and make me realize that that quarterfinal match, although it was very important and I really wanted, actually it wasn't a quarterfinal match, I'm sorry, it was a fourth round match. But it helped me recognize that there were more important things in life. And so when I went on the court to play that match, I was much more relaxed, because I realized that there was more to my life than just that particular match. So if you're able to keep things in perspective, it can be huge. Anyway, moving on, you can use this time to enjoy your family. I watched, some of you may have watched this, there was a Zoom chat between Roger Federer and Rafa Nadal. It was on a few weeks ago, I think. And they were talking, and I was struck by the fact that Roger said that how much he was enjoying the fact that he could just be with his family, and he didn't have the pressure of, knowing that next week he had a tournament, or 2 weeks from now he had a tournament. And so it gave him a whole new appreciation for his family and his kids. And I thought that was really nice. So hopefully this time can be a good time for you to also appreciate your family and, enjoy that time with them. There might be a tendency to want to use this time to get ahead of the competition. And I think that is, obviously it is a good time for you to get in some good training and practice if you can, if you're able to get on the courts. Things are starting to open up now, so many of you probably are able to get back on the courts. But what was really interesting was when I was listening to the Rafa and Federer match interview or discussion they were having with each other. They were both saying that they weren't playing very much, and Rafa in particular was saying that he wasn't playing. And then my husband told me the other day that he heard that Rafa was really spending a lot of time on the court, playing each day. He had a private court that he could use. So it sounds like he is really using this time to practice hard and get ahead. I think the trick, the balancing act that you have to take into consideration is, as I said before, we don't really know when things are going to get back to normal. So you want to avoid the tendency to practice so hard now and that you burn yourself out. Because I think could be a good time to just refresh your mind and get yourself to the point where when you do start playing and competing again, you're really fresh and eager and ready to go. So I think it's very important to find that balance between not overdoing it and burning yourself out and staying fit and staying in shape, which leads me to my final point here on this page, is to find creative ways to stay fit physically and mentally. And we'll get into some of the mental things a little bit later, but staying physically fit, I'm sure you all have lots of ways of doing that. I like to run a little bit, and as a tennis player, I don't run long distances. I tend to run short distances and intersperse those with sprints. I used to jump rope. That's a very useful exercise and way of keeping your legs and your arms both strong. I don't do that so much anymore because I'm getting old, and I find the pounding of jumping rope is is a little bit too much, so I don't do that. Swimming can be helpful. The only thing with swimming is you're using different muscles than you use in tennis, so that can be counterintuitive. But there, obviously, you can be lifting weights, light weights, lots of repetitions. I don't need to go into all of that. I'm sure you have, a lot of your own ideas. I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but feel free to interrupt me, ask questions, jump in. In fact, I welcome that, because I as I said before, I'm not that comfortable just speaking on and on and on. So I'd love to hear from some of you if you have comments on anything that I've said already. Don't be afraid to jump in. Okay, it doesn't look like it. Nobody's brave enough to, so I'm going to move on.
Hey, I'll jump in on one thing.
Okay, Ben.
I don't know if you mentioned it because I had to move away for a moment, but I find the value of shadow tennis to be very useful. I don't know if you mentioned that earlier or not, but.
Yeah, I haven't mentioned that, but go ahead, because I think that's really great. I used to do that a long time ago. I haven't done it recently, but why don't you elaborate?
Well, first of all, I agree with you about the jumping rope. As you start to get older, that is a tough one and might be counterproductive with the pounding on your knees and joints. But, the shadow tennis, I used to call it shadow boxing because it's like shadow boxing where you're simulating the movement in tennis and the stroke production so you can get a real workout out of it and also practice, the strokes themselves. And some of the videos I've seen on it, you want to include not just balls in your strike zone, but, hitting balls that are higher, lower, variety, change the direction, things like that. Go hard for about 15, 20 seconds, rest and recover, go hard again, make an interval just like the sport of tennis. And I've done some Zoom meetings with kids that I coach on the tennis teams. I coach high school tennis, and we always include shadow tennis as part of what we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
on top of that, it's good to see Anna Weltman live. I've had a little interaction with her through email, and she's a big wig in sports psychology, so it's good to see her in person, kind of.
Well, that's great. Yeah,
she is. She's a good one. She's good at this stuff. Anyway, on the shadow tennis, I'd recommend it for tennis players, especially if you can't get on the court a lot. I think it can be very helpful, and I'm trying to encourage the high school boys and girls that I coach to do the same thing.
Good advice. And one thing I would add to that, I think, is when you're doing that shadow tennis, I would try to really be conscious of your center of mass and feeling your body weight. So really actually engage your mind and feel the muscles moving. So you're actually sort of rehearsing it mentally as well as physically.
That's outstanding. Yes, having that low center of gravity and moving like you would in tennis.
Yeah, and really feeling the weight transfer and feeling your center of mass. Yeah.
Good point.
Okay, anyone else want to comment? Okay, so some mental strategies. I mean, I'm a visual learner, so I find watching videos extremely helpful. Unfortunately, I don't have very many videos of myself. Our house burned down a number of years ago, and so I lost some of the ones that I would have enjoyed watching. But it's, I just feel like watching videos, there's so much you can learn. I mean, I can just watch a match or watch a video, it's the same kind of thing. And subconsciously, I pick up stuff that I'm not even aware I'm picking up. So I just find, doing that very helpful. Watching videos of yourself, think about, look to see if you're making the same mistakes over and over again and how you could improve on that. And do you have any weaknesses that your opponent is exploiting? Are there things that you can figure out that learn from the video by noticing how your opponent is winning points off you? Are there predictable patterns in your style of play? Do you hit the ball cross court from a certain position? Every time the ball lands in that position, do you always go cross court, or do you always go down the line? Or are there any things that you do that are predictable that your opponent would be able to make it easier for your opponent to sort of read your style of play? And because I think that's one of the things that I really pick up by watching other people play that I'm not necessarily consciously aware of, is I'm able to see what kinds of shots they hit from different positions in the court. So if you're able to do that, I think it's very helpful. Because I think watching yourself also provides like a visual memory bank for you, so that when you do find yourself in a slump or really struggling, or you're having trouble with a particular shot, if you're able to have that visual image in your mind, so that when you're on the court struggling, you can take yourself back to that visual, video in your mind. And instead of giving yourself physical instructions, just try to play that out, play those shots out through the video in your mind. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but my brain works like that. So I suspect there are some of you out there who can relate to that. I hope so anyway. You can learn strategies from, watching your opponents. I've said that before. You can watch videos of other players who are better than you, so that you can learn from them. Visualization is a great way to make a quick transition back to your sport. I can remember when I was on the tour, I had a knee surgery. I had a little bit of a cartilage that was torn, and I had that scoped. And so I watched videos during the few weeks that I was off, and it really made my return to the game much easier, because I was able to transition in with very little practice out on the tennis court. Another story I have, which is kind of fascinating and has many elements to it, is back, I don't even remember the year, but I was playing a match against Monica Seles. Actually, it was in Chicago. It was an indoor tournament, and I hadn't actually arrived at the scene. My husband had another engagement, and he wasn't going to be able to be in Chicago until Tuesday evening or Monday evening. So what I did was I called the tournament in advance, which you were allowed to do, and you could try to request a late start. So I called the organizers and I said, is there any way I could get a Tuesday start instead of Monday? And they said to me, sorry, you've drawn Monica Seles, the number 1 seed in the first round, and you're scheduled to play the feature match on Monday night. So, and I'd been training, I'd been really dedicated for the 3 or 4 weeks before this event. I'd had some time off, and so I'd been working really hard, training daily. I'd been, running lines, sprints on the court. I was jumping rope. I was practicing my serve. I'd been really working hard, and I was struggling. When I would play practice matches, I'd be terrible. I was really struggling, and I just kept saying to myself, keep doing what you're doing, keep training hard. And anyway, I showed up for my match at the tournaments in Chicago. And being that it was held at a university, we were playing on one court only. And so there was no practice site. So we had to practice at a club in Midtown Chicago. And so you had to plan your practice to give yourself enough time to get through the traffic to get to the match. So I was practicing warming up with one of the other players who had a match right before me. And, I was terrible. I was so bad. I finally just said to her, I couldn't keep the ball in the court. And I finally said to her, just tell me, what you need, and I'll feed you balls, and I'll just, don't worry about me, because I'm just really bad. Anyway, so I gave her the practice, tried to give her the practice that she needed. And we went over to the arena. And as it turned out, matches were going really slowly. All the matches had gone 3 sets. And so they were about 2 matches behind. So what ended up happening is I ended up sitting in the stadium watching the matches before me. And being a visual learner, I was, watching hours of matches from behind the court, so I could see the whole court. And what I found very helpful in that situation is to put myself in the shoes of the player who's closest to me, whose back is to me. And I'll do different things, like I'll focus only on their footwork. So you don't even watch the ball going back and forth, you just watch their footwork. And then what else I'll do is I'll still putting myself in the shoes of the person who's closest to me. I'll watch the court, and as that person's about to hit the ball, as they're in the setup position, I'll try to anticipate which way I would hit the ball, and then see which way she hit the ball, and see if it's the same. Anyway, so I was doing that for these couple of matches before mine, and in that time my husband was able to get to the stadium in time. And he and I were both sitting there watching matches. And at one point I said to him, I'm so nervous. I'm playing awful. I've been playing terribly for 3 weeks. I'm terrified. I'm going to go out on the court and just make an absolute fool of myself. And, we talked a little bit more, and he said to me, well, why don't you see if you can get a beer? Go and find yourself a beer in the stadium. And and I'm not a drinker. I don't drink very much. And so certainly at that time, I didn't even, drink anything. And I went looking for a beer. And because it was a university campus, there was no beer to be found, which was a fortunate thing, because I ended up winning the match. But one of the key things my husband said to me before going on the court, he said to me, don't think about anything else but trying to control the point. So don't even try to win the point. Just see if you can control 1 point. And if you control 1 point, see if you can control 2 points. So I went into the match with that goal. And before I knew it, I was in the zone. I was playing the best tennis of my life, almost. And I ended up winning the match, I think 6-3, 6-4. I was serving and volleying, just totally controlling the match. But anyway, that is a long story that illustrates, I think, a number of points. The importance of continuing to train hard, even if things aren't going well. Also, a key thing, which I'll get into a little bit later when I explain the concentration styles, but the cue that my husband gave me to focus on trying to control the point was a great example of getting outside of my own internal negative thinking and focusing externally on the task at hand. And I think that's a critical thing for coaches and athletes to remember when they're having, when they're struggling, when they're having internal dialogue, when they're being distracted, is to give yourself an external cue to focus on, to get your focus outside of yourself and focus on a task. So that was a long story. But I should add that I'm thankful that there was no beer in the stadium when I was playing Monica, because otherwise I might have been an alcoholic, thinking that it was the beer that caused me to win the match. But in actual fact, it was just the adjustment of my mental focus that was able to bring me out of myself. Are there any comments or questions that anybody wants to make? I welcome them.
Yes, I do. I have heard that often, and that's great advice your husband gave. Controlling the point, as you had mentioned. I've worked a lot of basketball camps, and I'm a former coach for basketball and played in college and whatnot. I've often heard, control one possession at a time. Every time a team makes a drive down the court, unlike a lot of NBA teams, colleges, men and women, they play it very differently. One possession, they're working for that controlled shot. They're working for that, team possession, for that just right maneuver.
Mhm.
If it doesn't happen, they get back and they're playing defense. But possession by possession, inch by inch, it's a cinch.
Yeah.
The old adage. But thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. Okay, are we ready to move on, or does anyone else wanted to speak?
Hello. I put a question on the chat.
Chat.
Not sure if
Okay.
you saw
Sorry,
it.
I don't have the chat tuned in here. Let me see. Oh, do you want to just ask me the question anyway?
Yeah. That's what I was. So I mean, I don't know. I don't think it has much to do with this specific slide, but my question was, I was kind of looking over your bio, and you have an impressive bio as far as tennis. So my question was, like, what's your definition? After the career that you've had, what's your definition of success? Because I know myself, and I'm sure many others, tend to define their success based on what they've accomplished on the tennis court or off the tennis court. But now that with the career that you've had, how would you define it now, and have us define it as far as is it based on accomplishments, or the fact that you actually had the opportunity to pursue a professional tennis career, or how would you define success?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great question, because I think that, I don't know if you were here in the beginning where I talked about how athletes have, their identity gets tied up in their ranking and, who they are as a tennis player. And, when I did interviews, when the news media used to ask me in South Africa, what are your goals? And, I always used to say, well, I want to be number one in the world. And, and I don't know if it was obviously not a really realistic goal, because I never did achieve number one in the world. But I think, it is important to set your goals high, because if you set your goals too low, you never will achieve as great as you're capable of. So, when I got to the end of my career and I retired, it was, as I said earlier, my highest ranking was 15 in the world. So I could look at my career and think, well, I was a failure because I never achieved number one. But, you have to put things in perspective, as I said earlier. You think about how many players today would love to play on the pro tour, and how many of them actually make it onto the pro tour. So to put things in perspective, I had to recognize, wow, I did really well to even make it on the tour. And then I got to number 15 in the world. And, as most of you know, the higher up you get in the rankings, the more difficult it is to maintain that high ranking, because you have to keep your level of play up, week in and week out. My career, I was able to have some great wins here and there, but I couldn't do it week in and week out like the top players did. So, I look back on my career, and I'm very proud of being able to competed at the highest level, having beaten, a number of the top players. Was it, would I have liked to have done better? Absolutely. But I was able to do what I love to do, play tennis, earn a living, travel the world, meet amazing players. What I found so wonderful now is, I'm able to go on Facebook, and I have a number of friends from all over the world who I knew from the tour. And that's really special, to be able to still be communicating with some of those players is really wonderful. And then what I could never have predicted, I'm still playing senior tennis. I would never have thought that after almost 20 years on the pro tour that I would find myself playing senior tennis. But I've played some of the age group tournaments. I won the 50 and over World Championships in 2012, I think. Got to the finals of the 50s in about 4 years later as well, lost in the final. And I've represented the US in a number of the senior, competition, World Championships. And I think we've won the World Championships about four 4 or 5 times. So that's been special. I've been able to, you know, experience tennis in a team atmosphere with 3 other players on the team and travel to some cities I've never been to as a tour player. So I feel very grateful for having been able to have the kind of career that I did have. So I appreciate your question. I hope I answered it.
No, yes, you did. You answered it more than I expected. I appreciate you keeping it, you know, real with me and honest, and just, you know, being, you know, honest as far as, you know, yeah, I wanted to be #1 in the world. I didn't accomplish that, but now looking back, it's, you know, you did accomplish a lot, and you did, you know, do a lot, and you have a lot of, you know, good things to look back on. So, I mean, I think that's a good message and good advice for myself and for others listening in. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Any other thoughts, questions? Okay, I'm going to move on if I can. I don't know why I'm not able to do this. Oh, there you go. So this is a very sort of complicated diagram. It's, you know, as you probably know, my husband's a sports psychologist, one of the founders of sports psychology. And this is his concentration, his concentration model that he uses. And basically he talks about how concentration has both width and direction. So you have, at the top of the page, you have external, and down below you have internal. And so those can be broken down into broad external and narrow external, and broad internal and narrow internal. And why I thought this would be helpful is because athletes, when they play, or a tennis player, when they're in the zone, they're staying mostly in the external. You know, you want to be outside of your head, focusing outwardly, and if you're in the zone. So for example, the broad external here, a person with a broad external, tennis player with a broad external focus is going to be focused on the other side of the court. You know, what's happening with her opponent, the ball on the other side of the court. And then as the ball comes to my side of the court, my focus is then going to shift from broad external to narrow external. So my focus is going to then narrow in on the tennis ball so that I can then execute the shot. And a player who's in the zone is going to be doing, you know, moving automatically specifically from back and forth from those two quadrants, but also you'll have a little bit of the narrow focus coming into it. For example, the way you would use the broad internal is for example, when I was playing on the tour in the early years, I kept a little booklet. You know, so if I played against an opponent, I would then write down some of their weaknesses, some of their strengths, some of the ways that I was able to win points. So going back to the broad internal, I was able to go back into my memory or into my book and extract some of that information. So I would then be able to use that information to execute my shot. So that's an example of broad internal. It's going back into your memory to recall things from the past so that you can anticipate what the competition's going to do. And it's also, you would use broad internal when you're developing training goals or setting goals. The narrow internal is where I feel like, certainly for me, where my problems arose, because narrow internal is where your concentration, you're organizing information, you mentally rehearse things, but it's also the place where you can have the negative thinking. So you could, as a tennis player, you know, if you're thinking, I hope I don't double fault, or, you know, last time I hit this shot, I missed it. So that's going to that narrow internal place where anytime you're focused internally, it means you're not focused externally. And that's where your problems occur. So I hope I'm not confusing you, but if you're in the zone, you're going to be moving automatically through and making the adjustments through all these zones. You're not going to be consciously aware of each different zone. It's just going to happen automatically. So I hope that is not confusing. So at the bottom I've written, under pressure, athletes can fail to shift their focus of attention and become stuck in their dominant style of focus, and that's when choking happens. I can give an example of myself. I think one of my strengths is my ability to analyze a situation. So I can watch a match and I can very easily analyze what's going on. I can sort of figure out what the opponent's thinking, what they're going to do, and how that hurt. And that, though that can be viewed as a very positive thing, once you get on the tennis court, what I found myself doing sometimes was overanalyzing. So I would think, oh, okay, in this situation, this player did X. And I would sort of get trapped in that overthinking of, I'd be up ready to serve at the line and think, okay, should I serve wide or should I serve down the middle? And I'd start second guessing myself based on information that I had in my brain about what that person would do under certain circumstances. And that can be crippling if you start overanalyzing a situation. So and I've given you a lot of information in a very short time, so feel free to ask questions if I haven't been clear.
If I can, I would love to ask another question. This is Adrian again.
Yeah, hi Adrian.
So what are some tools or strategies that you use, as far as, concentration, like to get your focus back? Because I feel I find myself, whether things are going good or bad, when things are going good, maybe you relax a little bit and like you said, you're in a zone, you're kind of in a rhythm, but then maybe sometimes I feel I relax myself a little bit too much, or sometimes maybe things are going really bad and I'll have those times during the match where I'll have like 5 or 6 straight airs and I just get really mad and frustrated. And I tend to lose focus a little bit. So what are some of the strategies that you used when you're playing that got you back into focus?
Yeah, I think one of the things that helped me the most was to zero in on what my strategy was. So ideally you've come up with a strategy before you even step on the court, and then be aware of what my opponent's weaknesses are. And in those situations where you're struggling and you're getting mad at yourself and you're making errors, I would force myself to play to my opponent's weakness. I think I have a really good example of how this happened to me once. Early on in my career, I was playing in Sydney, Australia. I was playing, I think it was qualifying rounds of a major tournament. And the player I was playing against it was somebody I should have beaten fairly easily, and I was struggling and I was making errors, and I think she was probably leading. I think she might have won the first set and was up in the second, and I was on my way out. I was going down, and I was so bad. I said to myself, okay, just hit the ball to the middle of the court. So I didn't even try to place the ball. I just hit it down the middle of the court. Every ball, just get it back down the middle of the court. And I to this day, I don't really know what happened, but except that I was keeping more balls in play. But I ended up winning the match, and I don't know whether it was because my opponent couldn't handle balls down the middle. She didn't know what to do with them. But I think what I'm trying to say is you want to give yourself one instruction and just keep executing that. And then once you start getting back into a better focus, a better external focus, I think things will just take care of themselves. You'll begin to automatically just play better, and the right shots will be obvious to you. Is that making sense?
Yeah, that's something I I'm sure I feel like I've done before, but I mean, you know, no one's ever told me that. So I mean, that's very, very helpful. Something I'm definitely going to try soon. So thank you.
Yeah. The graphic that I have up on the screen is something that I used occasionally. Was if I was to go into a match, sort of with the image on the left of the boat on the pond, where there's very little, you know, movement, everything's still and calm. So that's how you want to go into the match, and you know, keep your emotions even, so they know, you know, not a lot of movement in the water, and a good reflection there, so you're able to sort of see your own reflection. What's inevitably going to happen in a match, it always happens, you know, your opponent hits a good shot, or you get angry, you know, that represents a stone being thrown into the calm water. And, you know, that stone, depending on how big it is or how big you allow it to be, can cause a big ripple in the calm surface of the water. So when I was really struggling, if I was able to sort of think about, keep your mind like water, the left image, when things happen that cause an emotional reaction, you know, it's going to have a ripple effect, but I want to be able to contain it, control my emotions, you know, not overreact, not underreact, just let it go, and things will calm out again. So I think that was, I don't know if that'll be helpful for you, but that was something that I found helpful.
Yeah, no, that'll definitely be helpful. I know I tend to get pretty frustrated on the court. So yeah, this is something I could use as well. So thank you for that again.
You just keep redirecting yourself back to a task, so that you're focused on something on the other side of the court, a strategy, or, you know, that'll get your focus back. What do I have here? Okay, here we just a silly example. Some of you, you know, for most of us, getting angry on the court is not helpful. But if any of you have watched John McEnroe, when he was playing at the height of his career, you know, he was notorious for exploding, just losing his mind, screaming, shouting at everybody. But what was so amazing about him is he was able to use that anger to refocus. And, you know, that's something that you can, you know, be conscious of, be aware of. If you do get angry, try to use your anger in a positive way. Use it to motivate yourself, instead of, you know, allowing yourself to get into that, you know, out of control spiral where you just, you know, you're just focusing on the wrong things. And which turns to negativity, and just your play then deteriorates. So it's just an example. On the left, I have a picture of Serena pumping herself up. You know, it's really important to, you know, to have the right intensity. You know, if your intensity is too low, you're going to struggle to be competitive. You're going to struggle to be aggressive. So it's important to know what that ideal level of intensity is for you, and be able to fire yourself up and pump yourself up to achieve that ideal level. I know for me, if I got too wound up, too pumped up, you know, I didn't play well. I needed to be a little bit more calmer than most people, I think. I'm losing a slide here. Sorry, I'm gonna try to go back. Where is it? Oh, I wanted to speak a little bit about this. This imagery was also helpful for me when I'm anxious on the tennis court. I often will feel like the triangle on the left. You feel like you're standing on your point. You don't feel stable. Your center of mass, which is the X that I've put there, is raised up. It's too high. You don't feel balanced. Whereas ideally, you want to be like the triangle on the right, where it's flat on its base. and you feel stable, you feel secure, your footing under you is firm. But most of all, your center of mass is directly, above your feet. So, and the other thing is your breathing. You want to make sure that you're breathing not shallow, high up in your chest, but just calm, low down. Your mind is not racing. So for some people, that's a good visual image to have just on the tennis court, to remind yourself that you want to be like the triangle on the right. We've got about 10 more minutes here. I want to just talk a little bit about this other last screen here. Another thing that I find very helpful is to talk about soft eyes and soft hands. Soft eyes for me ties into what I was talking about earlier with the quadrants. If you've got soft eyes, you're able to have you're focused externally, so you have a good vision of the whole court. You can see your opponent, you can see the whole court, you can tell where your opponent is positioned on the court, you're aware of the wind, you're aware of the sun, you're aware of everything on the other side of the court, and your eyes aren't focused in on any one thing. It's almost like you've got this vision of everything out in front of you, and as the ball comes back and forth over the net from far away to close, your focus shifts from broad external to narrow external as you're about to execute the shot. But at the same time, when I'm playing well and I'm in the zone, when I'm focused in on the ball and it's close to me on my side of the net, I'm still able to see my opponent's side of the court. I've got soft eyes, so although I'm focused in on the ball, in the background I can see everything else. And that's just a great image that when I'm playing well, I'm able to do. And the other thing that's associated with that is it's almost like you have a camera in your head, and the camera is taking a broad, wide focus lens. With a wide focus lens, and then you're able to see everything, and it's taking photographs, and the more photographs that your camera takes as the ball gets closer to you, the more that will feel like a process is slowed down. I'm sure you've all had experiences where the tennis ball feels like a soccer ball, and it feels huge, and everything feels like it's in slow motion. Well, I think the reason that happens is because you're focused externally. You've got this soft eyes, and you're actually seeing the ball. You're taking lots of photographs as the ball's coming closer to you. But the more anxious you get, and the more internally you focus, the fewer photographs you're going to be taking. So things are going to seem speeded up, and you're going to feel more stressed and more anxious. So that's my view of soft eyes. And then soft hands is a similar thing. Because the more anxious you get, the more your muscles tense up. You grip your racket tighter. You don't feel the ball on your racket strings quite as well. You're not able to make the adjustment, the delicate adjustment, specifically on a volley. You're hitting with more of a club kind of grip. And so that's just another cue that I use, the soft hands and the soft eyes, to help me, achieve that level of focus and concentration that's ideal, produces the ideal performance. So we've got about 5 minutes left. I want to open it up to questions, comments, whatever you want. Feel free to jump in.
Last question for me. I have a bunch of more questions that I kind of came in late, so I didn't see the beginning part of your presentation. But definitely wanted to pick your brain more. So I don't know if I can contact you privately, through email or what.
Yeah, I'll figure out how to get the chat going here, and I'll put my email in the chat, if I can do this. Yep, okay. And then anybody who has questions, feel free to email me, and I'll be doing this again. I believe it's next Saturday as well. I think the same time, and I'll either email you the answer, or we can talk about these questions next week. So did I send that or not? Do I have to click return?
Yes.
Yes, I do. Yes, there it is.
Okay. Thank you so much for that.
Okay. Yeah. Anybody feel free to email me your questions. I'll try to answer them, and it'll help me also to focus on the direction for next week as well.
Did you send that to everyone or just to a specific?
Oh, sorry. Did
We don't see it.
should have gone. Oh, yeah. It should have gone to. No, it should. I didn't. Here we go. Sorry, I didn't.
Okay.
Here we go. There we go. Okay. Do you see it out there now? No, not yet?
I don't see it.
Does anyone else see it?
No, I don't.
Oh, why is it doing this to me? Everyone publicly. Oh, yeah, I know why I'm doing this. Here we go. Sorry, I haven't got a lot of experience with this. Here we go. This will be right. Huh.
Yes.
Okay.
There we go.
Sorry.
Thank you. That's
Took me
okay.
a while.
Thank you.
Okay, so there must be people out there who want to talk. You want to tell me if you're coaches or if you're athletes, or what brought you here?
Well, I'll go ahead. I mean, maybe other people are shy, and I'll start it. I went to SDUIS, and your husband taught us, and in school, and also in a summer intensive, which was a great experience. And so been using the TASE for a long time, and tennis and golf are so related. I'm a golfer, so I started my field working with golfers, and there's just the difference being the two people involved, so that you're always sort of looking at your response to them. But I find that it's quite relevant, because when you're a golfer and you're paired up with two, or with one or three others, depending on how you're playing, it's the same thing. I like the comment you made about checking where their shots go and what their setup is, like just from their, let's say, feet to knees, and seeing those positionings, and then look at the outcome of those shots. And you can kind of do that with other golfers too, and that's just an extra help. Like, it's a little physiological kind of or biomechanical kind of feedback that helps. And in addition to all the other things your brain is processing, especially in golf, it adds a little bit of data. It helps a lot. So
Yeah.
That's a good comment.
Yeah, I would struggle as a golfer, because I too analytical. There's too much time to be thinking and second guessing, and
Well, there's a lot of strategies to deal with that. So you would probably learn them, or but yeah, it is tough. It's like all upfront analytics, and then you have to shut everything out, do your thing, and then go back to your full-time analytics. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for sharing. Is there anybody else out there who wants to chat?
Can you hear me? I do have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi. So I was a collegiate athlete. Now I'm a middle-aged mom of 3 trying to learn tennis. And I'm a clinical psychologist. And so I'm trying to apply a lot of what I know to tennis. But my big question is, what can I do between points to refocus? I play singles, to refocus, get my heart rate down, and reset mentally.
Yeah, I think the key thing, the first thing I would do is you want to take a deep breath and just sort of try to calm yourself down, try to let go of the last point. You obviously you want to analyze, what did you do wrong on the last point, or what did you do well, and then either if you did it, either let go of it and move your focus onto the next point, or you want to use what you've learned from the previous point so that you can focus, on something more positive for the next point. But I think, the primary thing is just take a deep breath, try to, return to your center, and maybe use your mind, focus your mind like water, just to keep that even keeled, get rid of all the emotions, negative, positive, stop thinking about outside things.
Mm-hmm.
I know as I get older, when I had kids, I was thinking about, okay, what am I going to buy at the grocery store? All that kind of stuff. And you've got to find ways to bring your attention back to the very next point and what you're going to do. I mean, maybe something helpful would be to think about, okay, where am I going to serve this first ball? And have a slight strategy. Okay, I'm going to serve out wide to the forehand. And then I'm going to, the court's going to be open and I'm going to go to a backhand. I'm going to come into the net, or, just have a sort of some kind of strategy in mind. And then that'll help set the wheels in motion for you to start the point and get it moving. And I think you will adjust.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Very helpful.
You're welcome. Well, I think we're over time. I don't know if this meeting automatically ends or if we can keep going. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Stay online. Otherwise, my husband's in the other room doing his presentation. It's supposed to start at 11. I'm sure he'll have a lot of good information.
Well, I
Thank you so
appreciate
much.
your time. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Good to see you.
thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Bye.